How do you compress recovery time in the shock phase? First, what is the shock phase? It is the first of three phases that we go through when we encounter a traumatic life event. The first phase is the shock phase, second is adjustment, third is renewal. And I discovered this from taking 8.5, 9 years of going through traumatic life events that I thought were just massive failures. And I included the explanation of the shock phase, the adjustment phase, and the renewal phase in my first book. So we're using the example of divorce. The shock phase is the first phase that you'll go through when you experience something that's extremely painful enough to be considered a traumatic life event. So any event that violates your ideals, your values, and your beliefs, and in some instances, your identity, can be considered a traumatic life event. For most people, divorce may not be considered a traumatic life event. It may only be considered a failure or a massive failure. But for an achiever who values keeping their commitments, our commitments, divorce is a traumatic life event. Why is it important to recognize it from the very beginning? Because if you recognize it from the very beginning, then you know that you have to recover quickly by compressing recovery time. If you don't recognize it as being a traumatic life event, because a traumatic life event and massive failures are different. Massive failures, traditional methods that time heals all wounds, works. If you fail in your business, eventually you work at it. In time, you'll recover. A traumatic life event, however, if you don't recover first, then the time cannot kick in to help you to heal the wounds. So here's an example of that. Have you ever known someone who was old? They're older, obviously, by the time you would get to know them, that were married, had children, and divorced. The children, 15, 20 years later, are now having their own weddings. And their parents cannot sit at the same table, cannot be in the same section of the reception. Why? Because they have animosity that has built up that's still the same as they had when they first were divorced. What happened? They never healed from it. Why didn't they heal from it? Because they never recovered. Why didn't they recover? Because they never forgave. A traumatic life event freezes us in time because our sense of justice has not been satisfied. So the emotions from our sense of justice not being satisfied are exactly the same no matter how much time passes. That's why it's important to understand the phases of going through something that would be considered a traumatic life event for an achiever. So we're going to discuss the shock phase. We've been using the example of divorce for the past few weeks because our relationships are the most impactful component of our life. So here is the three stages of the shock phase. It's anger, guilt, and depression. I'm going to discuss anger and how to move through it, because guilt usually won't apply, because there's a positive and a negative side of guilt. It usually won't apply if you've done your absolute best in your marriage. There's nothing to be guilty about. Depression is normal. The blues is normal, right? The low energy is normal, but major depression is always negative. That's not normal. We don't have to go through major depression, even though sometimes we do, because we don't handle the first two stages correctly, and I'll just put it that way. Anger has a positive and negative, and as an achiever, we are inclined to avoid the anger states because we don't want to be angry, which is understandable. But there's a positive and a negative to anger. There's a fundamental principle, I've shared this before, that says a word causing pain makes anger to come up. Word causing pain makes anger to come up. Actions causing pain makes anger to come up. Betrayal, neglect, contention, those are actions that we have the right to be justifiably angry about. Positive anger is the anger in the decision. Once we decide that our marriage is not going to succeed, and I'm using the example of divorce, once we decide we have to separate ourselves from a partner that we said we once loved, that is the anger part, right? We've been moved, pushed to that space. But once that decision has been made, anger no longer serves a positive function. If we continue to be angry, it becomes bitter. It becomes resentment. That is negative. Negative anger will always work against you. It will never hurt the other person because the negative energy that you give out will come back to you. They'll be just as angry at you as you are at them. They'll be justifying their actions or whatever happened in the relationship that caused its demise. So there's no resolution there. The only resolution is a positive anger, which is the anger in the decision. Once you made the decision, you don't go back to the way things were before. Here's what that allows you to do. It allows you to move to the second phase that I'm not going to go into detail about, but in the second phase of adjustment is the stages of renewal and acceptance, the first part of the stage of acceptance. Forgiveness is extremely important because the first person that we must forgive is the younger version of ourselves that put us where we are. It doesn't matter whether we were naive at that time, there's certain things we notice that we decided to ignore at the time, it doesn't matter. The younger version of ourselves made a decision that put us in a place that we don't want to be. We want to forgive that younger version, even though it may be challenging. Positive anger is what allows you to be able to do that. How do you compress the recovery time? It's by making the decision that once we are at this place of getting a divorce, or whatever the traumatic life event is, whatever decisions need to be made to move us forward, make those decisions. It allows you to move across from being angry to deciding to forgive, because forgiveness is always to your benefit. Forgiveness allows you to recover. Once you're at the space of forgiving the younger version of yourself, you can begin to recover. You can begin to heal. You compress the recovery time, right? You're going from anger, positive anger, to forgiveness, even though it's difficult, but it compresses the time. Then time can kick in and allow you to eventually heal, and you'll discover you'll heal faster. What you'll also discover is that as you're healing, you'll eventually decide to forgive your partner or the person or the circumstance or the events that put you where you are, because just like you've grown, you give them allowance for not having grown at the time that they did things or they said things that severed the relationship. It's important to understand the difference. Any other option that you decide to take will always work against you. Bitterness will grow, resentment will grow, and those emotions keep you frozen in time. So you are not able to be around someone and not feel those aggressive, negative emotions. It grabs you. It doesn't do anything for them. It may grab them too, but it's just a negative circle of energy that nobody's escaping from, and you deserve better than that. So this is how you move through the shock phase. Anger, positive, is where you want to be. Negative anger is what you want to avoid. Now I'm going to stop here because the next two stages of guilt and depression are avoidable. The only time that you'll go into guilt, and there's a positive and negative to guilt, so I'll just real quickly share with you the positive and negative of guilt. Positive guilt is when you, because you have not recovered, because you're a hurt person, the universe sends someone, if it's a relationship, the universe will send someone that's good for you into your space, but because you're hurt, you won't give them your best, what they deserve. If you push that person away, you feel guilty about it, because you'll know they deserve better from you. That's positive guilt. Positive guilt is a guilt that moves you to feel bad about something that we've done, but that we've learned a lesson from, so we don't do it again. And it takes some time if we do that to someone, to get past it. Negative guilt is when we take responsibility for something that we did not directly do, but we feel bad about it because we should have set a better example. For example, if you're a parent and you put your time into raising your kids the absolute best you could, poured all into them, and then they make a decision that's so counterproductive and negative, you know it's going to have a seriously negative impact on your life, we feel bad about that. Sometimes we feel guilty about that. Sometimes we feel we should have done more. But there's nothing that we could have done. That's negative guilt. It works against you. You have to let that go. So I'll discuss that more in the next video. So for now, that's where we are. So how can you compress the recovery time when you go through positive anger? Here's how you do it. You have to show gratitude for the lessons learned. If we don't have gratitude for the lessons learned, we'll take the pain from what we're experiencing today and rewrite the past. You have to decide to take the time to isolate, take the time, and put the memories in their proper order. The good ones, then sliding down, lessons learned. And if you do that, you can recover faster. You can have the anger of the decision, marriage didn't work, move on, learn the lessons, let me forgive it now. That's the thought for today. This is the third video. The first video was on recovering from the decision of divorce. Second video was on the process of divorce. you know, the isolation, loneliness, failure, and uncertainty, you know, going through that. And this video is about the shock phase of any traumatic life event that you may experience. We always go through shock first. So as always, I'm gonna wish you all the blessings and success you deserve. I'll create the video on guilt, and you'll have that ready to view in about a week. God bless.